All right, Rabbi, say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsor for the month of Elul, Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, for dedicating all the Shum and Joshos this month in honor of their children and all of the suburban sons and daughters beginning their year of study in Eretz Yisrael. May their Torah study and mitzvahs in the Holy Land merit the release of our precious hostages, the success of our soldiers, the return to their families, and the arrival of Mashiach Tzidkinu Mehira B'Yameinu. But with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. Today's daf is Tzadik Zayin 97, and we are picking up on Tzadik Vav Amud Beis 96b, the last line. So the Gemara says as follows: Ubiyoser Michdei Midaso Mipligi. So if you remember again, in yesterday's daf, we had this very interesting case about what is the status, again, ostensibly the topic of our sugya is Hilchos Brachos, and specifically, again, what is the bracha over a drink that is made by pouring water over the wine, over the grape pulps, right, or the grape dregs. After you go ahead and you press the grapes to go ahead and make wine, so you have the leftover pulp. If you mix in water with that pulp, what is the status of the resulting liquid? Does it have the status of wine and therefore it gets a break pragafen, or perhaps it has the status of colored water or something else and therefore only gets a shahakol niyeh bidvaro? So we had that machlokes yesterday. And the Gemara actually spoke about this interesting idea that maybe it depends what you get out after you pour in. In other words, if you're pouring in 3 cups of water and get out 3 cups of liquid, maybe that's still water, right? You go ahead and you pour out 3 cups and you get out 4 cups, then that could be wine. You pour in 3 cups, get out 3.5 cups, that could be a machlokas. So the Gemara says, really? Do people argue, in other words, in a case where you're putting in X and get out X plus Y? Is there really an argument about the status of the resulting liquid? V'hatanan we learned, top of Tzadik Zayin 97a, hametamed v'nosan mayin b'mida. So metamed, so tamed means this process of pouring water over wine pulp, wine dregs. So the Gemara says, if you go ahead and you pour nosan mayin b'mida, so you go ahead, Rashbam says over here, mayin b'shmarim patrim meiser. Now this is talking about over here the following case. Imagine for a moment I have grapes that were meiser or truma, right? And then what happens? I go ahead and I press them. I make the wine from them. So obviously that's truma or meiser wine. And now I have the leftover pulp. So what's the halacha? So I'm a tami v'nasamayim b'mido. So I have the temet. I go ahead and I pour water over it, and the water that comes out is the same amount. So I pour in 3 cups of water over this pulp of meiser. So what's the halacha? Umatze kedei midaso pater. So everyone agrees. Again, if you take 3 cups of water, pour it over the wine pulp, I should say the grape pulp of meiser, everyone agrees that the resulting liquid is pater from meiser. Because I poured 3 cups of water in, I'm getting 3 cups of water out. That's the end of the discussion. It's water. It's water. Rabbi Yehuda Mechayiv. I'm sorry. Rabbi Yehuda Mechayiv. Rabbi Yehuda holds that you're pater, that you're chayiv, that the resulting liquid has the status of meiser, and therefore you will be chayiv. Now we'll say, now what's the point over here? Ad kan lo pligi ela bichdei midaso. Now what's interesting to note over here is this machlokes only deals ultimately with what? With what we call kedei midaso. What does kedei midaso mean? That I have 3 cups of water, I'm pouring in 3 cups of water, and I get out 3 cups of water. So that's where there's a machlokes. Is the resulting liquid considered to be just simply water, or does it have the status of meiser? Now again, I will say, remember, just appreciate the shift over here. Beforehand, we were just talking about Hilchos Brachos. So now we've shifted a little bit. This is not Hilchos Brachos, this is Hilchos Meiser. But it's really the same principles involved, same exact principles. So again, I have meiser grapes or truma grapes. I go ahead and squeeze out the wine. I have the leftover dregs, and now I pour more water over it. Is the resulting liquid meiser or not? So again, everyone agrees. So I should say, first case, I'm pouring in 3 cups of water, getting out 3 cups of liquid. The Tanakama says, pater, that's not meiser, that's water. Rabbi Yehuda says, you chayiv. But even so, ad kan lo pligi ela bichdei midaso. The machlokes is where I have 3 cups of water, I'm pouring in 3 cups of water, and I get 3 cups of liquid out. Aval yosem michtei midaso lo pligi. But aloha lemaisa, if I poured in 3 cups of water and what? Got 3.5 out, or whatever additional amount out, it sounds like in that case everyone agrees that the resulting liquid will be meiser. Look at the Rashbam. For second Rashbam, first line of the Rashbam. Second Rashbam on the first line. Aval yosem michtei midaso. Porta lo pligi Rabbi Yehuda ela mechayvin b'meiser v'huadin lebirchas hayayin good. Just lost the place. Porta lo pligi Rabbi Yehuda ela mechayvin b'meiser v'huadin lebirchas hayayin deharabanan chumra leslu gabe meiser daha b'chtei midaso lo mechayvi ela mishum dechashivi leyayin. So the idea over here is, what you see from here is that halacha l'maisa that the machlokes is only when you're getting out the same exact amount of liquid that you poured in. But everyone seems to agree that if halacha l'maisa you pour in 3 cups and you get out, we'll call it 3.5 cups or more than that, then that resulting liquid is wine. And therefore, again, because it's wine, it will be chayiv in meiser, and therefore, for our purposes, because it's wine, it will also be chayiv in the bracha of borei pri hagafen. So what the Gemara is just questioning over here is, beforehand, in the previous sugya, it sounded like there was still a machlokas that if you introduced X amount of water and got out X plus Y of liquid, that there was a machlokas as to the status of that new liquid. Here, the Gemara seems to be indicating that everybody would agree that when you pour in X amount of water and get out X plus Y, that Allah said that new liquid is considered to be wine, and therefore gets a very pragafen, and it'll be chayv meiser as well. To which the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. Huadin dafilu bi yoser michtei midaso pligi. The truth is, the machlokes applies even when you get out more liquid than you introduce. The machlokes is even in a case where I pour in 3 cups of water and get out 3.5 cups of liquid, the machlokes still applies. The Gemara says, so then why do we bring up this machlokes before on the top of this amud? Why do we introduce this machlokes of pouring in 3 cups of water and getting out 3 cups of water? Why introduce it like that? Lo di'acha kochod Rabbi Yehuda, in order to highlight the strength of Rabbi Yehuda's position. Because remember again, Rabbi Yehuda is on record as saying that halacha l'maisa, if you introduce 3 cups of water and get out 3 cups of liquid, Rabbi Yehuda holds that is still considered to be wine. So therefore, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it'll be chayv and meiser, and according to Rabbi Yehuda, you'll make a brei pri hagafen. So that is a pretty strong statement, and therefore, again, the Gemara wanted to really highlight the strength of that particular statement. Okay, incredible. Boy minei Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak mi Rav Chia bar Avin. So Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Chia bar Avin, shmarim sheyesh bahem tam yayin mahu. An interesting case over here. What if you have the dregs, the pulp, and the pulp itself has tam yayin, has the flavor of wine? What is the status? Now take a look at the Rashbam for just a moment. Shmarim sheish b'hem tam yayin mahu lebirchas hayayin. So what is the status again? If you have dregs, you introduce water, and the water comes out with flavor of wine. What is the status of that resulting liquid? So the Rashbam just points out over here, Ubraisa lo havashmiale, di havashmiale hahi havale lemeimar halacha kachirim, oina halacha kachirim. Now I will say, now the truth is, the Rashbam just points out, we spoke about this already. Right? This has been our whole sugya. So the Gemara says over here, clearly when Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is asking this question, he did not hear about the previous brisa. Because had he heard about the previous brisa, he would have just asked, does the halacha follow the achirim or not follow the achirim? Okay, in any event, he didn't hear it, and therefore he's asking the question again. Amrlei, misavres chamruhu, kiva ba'amhu, to which ultimately Rav Chia bar Avin answers, you think that this is called wine? It's not called wine, rather it's only called a flavoring. Kiyuahu, it's called a flavoring. In other words, the Rabbi say, essentially what we're getting to over here is, what is the definition of wine? And this is the fundamental machlokas. Is the definition of wine that which you squeeze out of grapes? And then maybe that's it. Maybe that's even the core definition. Wine is considered to be the process of squeezing liquid out of grapes. That's it. Anything else might produce a wine-like drink, but it's not wine. Or do we say that wine is any drink that is flavored by grapes? Okay, in which case it can well be the nafkamina. The nafkamina would be this kind of case. I have wine, I have grape dregs, grape pulp. So now I go ahead and I pour water over that and allow that to soak. What is the status of the resulting liquid? So that seems to be, that is our ongoing machlokes, but at least over here, Rav Chiya Avin answered that halacha l'maisa, that is not called wine, it's called some type of drink, but l'maisa again it's a shahakol, it's just wine flavoring and would not be considered wine at all. Okay, fascinating. We'll see the halacha l'maisa with this tomorrow probably actually. So Tana Abanan, Shmarim Shal Truma, so we'll say now this is an interesting case. What if you have the following situation? The truth is, I realize, okay, the case we started on the top, I just want to clarify. The case of metamed v'nosan mayim b'mida is not a case of truma, I said it incorrectly, that's not the case of truma pulp. That's the case of just grape pulp. And then the shaila is the resulting liquid, is the resulting liquid chayiv in truma or not? Which is another way of asking, is it wine, right? Water is not chayiv in truma. Wine is chayiv in truma. So the way the Gemara started off in today's daf was that halacha l'maisa, if you go ahead and you soak this pulp in water, or you pour water in this pulp and you skim off the resulting liquid, is that resulting liquid chayiv in truma or not? So we'll say all of these are the same question. In other words, it's all the same question. If I go ahead and I have grape pulp and I go ahead and I pour water on it and now I get off the resulting liquid. So what we're asking over here is that considered wine or is that some type of just flavored water? And that has two nafkaminas so far. What are the nafkaminas? Number one, what's the bracha? Is it agafen or is it shahakol? And number two, which the Gemara introduced at the top of the daf, is it chayiv in meiser or not? Is it chayiv in meiser or not? If it's wine, yes. If it's water, no. Now I'll say, here's the meiser case. Here we go. This is very interesting. Tan Rabbanan, shmarim shal truma. So I'll say, so now I have truma grapes. I have truma grapes. Okay. Now from my truma grapes, I made wine. What's the status of wine made from truma grapes? Truma. Okay, fine, no problem. Now I have the pulp. So now I've made the wine. The grapes are truma. The wine is truma. No problem. Now I have the pulp. And now I go ahead and I pour water over that pulp. So that's shmarim shal truma. So this is actually very interesting. So the Gemara says, Rishon v'sheni aser, shlishi muter. The first, we'll call it steeping, and the second steeping, the resulting liquid is aser. Now what does it mean it's aser? It's truma. It's truma, right? So the first time I soak the pulp in water, right? And the second time I soak, the pulp in water, those resulting liquids are all considered to be truma. And therefore, halacha l'maisa aser means aser to a non-kohen. The non-kohen, am not permitted to partake of it because it has the status of truma. Ushlishi muter. But by the time we get to the third steeping already, ultimately again it's going to be muter because apparently by the time we get to the third steeping, that's no longer considered to be wine. That's just flavored water. Okay, Rabbi Meir says, Af shlishi b'mnosein tam. Very interesting. Rabbi Meir says, it depends. What does the third steeping taste like? If the third steeping tastes like wine, then ultimately it'll be wine. But if doesn't taste like wine, then it won't be wine. Fine. Vishal meiser. Now I'll say, ultimately meiser is the same halacha. What if I have grapes, right? Again, and I made wine from the grapes. So the grapes are meiser, the wine is going to be meiser. Now I have the pulp. So I have grape pulp of meiser, and now I'm soaking water in it. Rishon aser. So the results, right, from the first steeping will be aser. Sheni muter. But by the time we get to the second one already, it's muter. And I'll say now, as what we're going to remember again, meiser has a lesser sanctity than truma. So therefore, again, we're going to see this kind of go in gradations over here. Rabbi Meir says, Av sheni b'mnosein tam. Rabbi Meir says, no. Even the second steeping, it depends. If it has the flavor of wine, then halacha l'maisa it'll be treated like wine. If it doesn't have flavor of wine, then it's not wine. I v'shal hagdish. What about hagdish? right? What if I have grapes that are literally hegdish, and now again, right? I squeeze them, got the wine out of it, and now I have the dregs. I pour the water over the dregs. What is the status of the resulting liquid? So shlishi aser. So obviously the Gemara already skips. The first time you steep it, it's hegdish. Second time you steep it, it's hegdish. Third time you steep it, it's hegdish or revi'i mutter. By the time we get to the revi'i, the fourth steeping is going to be mutter. And Meir says, no. Af revi'i, but no same time. Rabbi Meir again says, even when you get to the fourth time, that's going to depend ultimately again on the flavor that it infuses into the water. So the Gemara says, or minhi, areze kasha, or minhi, shall hekdish li olam aser, v'shal meiser li olam mutter. So let's have another brisa. The brisa says, any steeping of grapes of hekdish will always be aser. First, fifth, 10th, doesn't make a difference. If you have grape pulp of hekdish and you soak water, you soak it in water, you pour water over it, any resulting liquid that is skimmed off that is going to be aser. The shal meiser liola mutter. But again, any steeping of meiser is going to be mutter. So obviously you have a contradiction. Kasha hekdish, kasha meiser. Contradiction. How do we resolve it? Not a problem. This is fascinating. Hekdish lo kasha. Kan biktusha, bless you. Kan biktusha saguf. Kan biktusha damim. So I will say this is quite fascinating. If you remember again in the world of hekdish, we have two different types of hekdish. What does that mean? This is what's called hekdish haguf. Hekdish haguf means the item itself is inherently sanctified versus hekdish damim, which is financial sanctity. So I give you a simple example. I have a I don't know, is it a bushel of grapes? Not a bushel of grapes. Bushel, all right, call it bushel of grapes, right? I have a bushel of grapes. So now I'm makdish that to the Beis HaMikdash. So there are two different ways that hegdish could take form. Possibility one is hegdish haguf, which is in Beis HaMikdash they need libations, they need nisachim. Nisachim come from wine. Wine comes from grapes. I'm giving these grapes to the Beis HaMikdash for libational purposes. That means the grapes themselves are inherently sanctified. Inherently sanctified. So therefore we'll say that Kedusha, it doesn't matter how many levels out, it's always Kaddish. That's going to be the case where no matter how many, so now let's say they make that libational wine, I have the grape pulp, no matter how many times you steep water in those grapes, ultimately again the resulting liquid is going to be Kodesh. It's going to be sanctified. It's going to have status of hektish. As opposed to Kedusha's damim. Let's say I go ahead and I'm makdish the bushel of grapes, and I say, hereby give this over to the Beis HaMikdash. So I'm giving it over now for financial purposes, which means the Beis HaMikdash could sell off those grapes, do whatever they want with the grapes, and use the proceeds to do whatever they want. That type of sanctity is more limited. That's going to be the case where we said before, the first steeping, second steeping, maybe even third steeping will be hegdish, but by the time you get to the fourth one, it's no longer going to be hegdish. Incredible. So the Gemara says, Meiser, and Meiser lo kasha. Similarly, again, when it comes to Meiser itself as well, there's no distinction. Kan be Meiser vadai, kan be Meiser d'mai. Ultimately, in both say, so one case is talking about Meiser vadai. Meiser vadai is definitive Meiser. That's going to be the case where the Gemara said the first steeping is going to be Asr, but then after that it is going to be mutter. After that's going to be mutter. And the other case is Meiser D'mai. Meiser also, we know D'mai. What's D'mai? Produce of an Amma Oretz. So Chazal, so the rabbis instituted that you have to retithe the produce of an Amma Oretz. Now why is that? Why is that? Because we're not sure exactly, did he tithe it or didn't he tithe it? Now that's rabbinic. So because that's rabbinic, if you were to take the grape pulp of Meiser of D'mai and steep water in it, it would be totally mutter. Totally mutter. Okay, interesting idea. So the Gemara goes right there. So I'll say very interesting sugya over here. Actually, yeah, it is, but we'll get to the primary interesting one in just a moment. Okay, so we'll say, so this is a little bit of an enigmatic statement over here. So Rabbi Shmuel Silber says as follows: the same way that we're talking about these halachas, in other words, about the status of steepage. I don't know if that's the right word, but okay. Status of steepage. When it comes to Isser, now what does it mean when it comes to Isser? I have grape pulp of truma, grape pulp of meiser, grape pulp of hegdish, and now I pour water on that. What is the status of the resulting liquid? Is the resulting liquid hegdish, truma, meiser? Now that's called iser. So the same we're talking about this with gabe iser. So the Gemara says, the same halacha applies to hechsher. Now, what is an hechsher? Now, both saying, remember again, we've learned this many times. In order for something to go ahead, and in order for, let's say, for a food item to go ahead, or for something in general to contract tumah, it has to come in contact with a liquid, right? And not any liquid, but one of the 7 liquids. Take a look at the Rashman for just a moment. Kach amru le'inyan hechsher, terishon v'sheni shel truma, chashuv nami yayin le'inyan hechsher, v'arishon shel meiser chashuv yayin le'inyan hechsher kin mefarish v'azil. So again, so the same way that we have this discussion of this machlokes in terms of iser, we also have the machlokes about whether or not these liquids have the ability to make something receptive to tumah. So the Gemara says, what are you talking about? So the Gemara says, good. Hechsheran demai. What are you talking about? Idemaya achshri machshri, idechamri achshri machshri. So if you're talking about the ability for the water that's being introduced, right, to let's say the dregs, to the pulp. So water itself is already receptive to tumah. What are you talking about? If you're talking about the resulting mixture, and it's considered to be wine itself is already receptive to tumah. So what are you referring here? To which the Gemara says, no. Lo tzrichu, this is very interesting. Shetamdu b'gemei geshamim. So what are we talking about over here? I have pulp. Right? And my pulp is sitting out. Let's say whatever it is, it's grape pulp of truma, of meiser, of hektish. Doesn't really matter which one it is. And it's sitting out there. What occurs? It rains. And the rain water comes onto that. Now, says, so here's a case of where I am not actively introducing the water, but rather, again, the water is being introduced on its own. So the Gemara says, maybe what the Gemara is suggesting over here is, even in that case, even though I did not put the water on, halacha l'maisa, the resulting mixture has the ability, is receptive to tumah. To which the Gemara says, I understand. But the moment, the Bava say, without getting into all the halachas of tumah and tar over here, so remember again, the halacha is like this. Anything that comes in contact with any of the liquids, by definition, is roi lekabel tumah. Water makes something huchshar, makes something receptive to tumah. So I'll say, so now interestingly enough, the Rashman points out what's unique about water is that in order for water to make something receptive to tumah, either the water has to have been placed there with kavana, or once the item becomes wet, the owner is happy with this newfound status. So water is the one liquid which requires some level of kana. Just parenthetically, how interesting is it that water, right, water is a liquid which allows something to be makabel tumah, yet water is also the very liquid, the only liquid that has the ability to remove tumah. Just a fascinating idea. Very, very Reb Tzadok-like. We've learned this in our last cycle of Reb Tzadok. How Reb Tzadok highlights this idea that in life there's no such thing as a bad koach or a good koach. There's energy. And in life, it's all a question of how you use your energies. Where do you choose to direct it? Which is incredibly important, because this is the yesod of tshuva. We often think erroneously that the entire avodah of tshuva is simply the cessation of sin. But the truth is that's not, we spoke about this before, that's not really that's part of tshuva, but what tshuva really is identifying, okay, I committed the following averos. Obviously, to commit those averos, I needed certain kohos. I need a certain energy. So now what real tshuva is taking those same energies that were used for hate and somehow redirecting them for the purpose of good. Because if all I do is shut down a behavior, that's certainly incredible. That's an incredible accomplishment. But I'm missing out on the opportunity to take all of those kohos that were used for negativity, that were used for sin, and to repurpose them. It's the water dynamic. The same water that has the ability to make something or enable something to be mekabel tuma, now also has the same ability to allow something to become tar. It's just rechanneling. Now again, it's not the same water, right? A little bit of water that falls from the sky could go potentially, or collected in a utensil, can make something mekabel tuma. For tara purposes, you have to rechannel that water differently, right? You need arbaim sa'ah, you need 40 sa'ah, it has to be rainwater, it has to be, so the details are different. You just have to rechannel a little bit differently. So much of life is just identifying, okay, I made mistakes, some pretty bad mistakes. But the good news is, those bad mistakes required a lot of energy. So now if I could just rechannel and repurpose that energy in the direction of positivity, the direction of holiness, there's no telling what I could accomplish. The Gemara says, okay, so what does it mean actually? The Gemara says, if it's megisham, even if it's rainwater, at the end of the day, if I collected that in a utensil, right, then by definition I wanted it. So if I wanted it, then it's hoshel kabel tuma. Lo tzricha shnismad ne'elav. No, the case over here is where ultimately, again, the water was collected on its own. But we're talking about multiple collections. Once you remove the first collection, the second collection, every time you remove it, that essentially shows that what? That you want it. So because you want it, halacha l'maisa, again, of course, is hushal kabel tuma, to which the Gemara says, Amra Papa, bepara sheshose rishon rishon. Interesting case over here. We're talking about every time the water collected, on the wine dregs, a cow drank it off. Right, the cow drank it. So halacha l'maisa, again, because the cow drank it, again, there wasn't anything there the first time, the second time, so on and so forth. Okay, all the Gemara is doing over here is equating that whatever is going to be true, halacha l'maisa, for Isser is also going to be true legabe hechsher, legabe the ability to go ahead and make something or make the item itself hoksher lekabel tuma. Beautiful. Boss, and I watch this sugya. Here we go. This is really interesting and incredibly halacha l'maisa as well. Amar Rav Zutra bar Tovia Amar Rav. Ein omrim kiddush hayom ela al hayayin. You could only make kiddush on wine that is fit for the Mizbeach. So I will say this is a fascinating halacha. By the way, the Rambam accepts this halacha l'maisa, that for kiddush that you make at your table on Shabbos and Yom Tiv, you have to use wine that is fit for the Mizbeach. So the Gemara says, okay, limi utemai. What does that come to exclude? What does that come to exclude? Ilema limi uti yain migito. So we'll say maybe it's coming to exclude. Yain Megiddo, we'll say, is essentially grape juice. Grape juice. Yain Megiddo just means wine that you get from squeezing grapes. In other words, remember again, so if you just squeeze the grapes, you get grape juice. Maybe it's coming to exclude grape juice. Ideally, you should not use, so we'll say, so just by the way, take a step back. What that means is, for Kiddush, you can only use wine that is fit for libational purposes, for Nesachim. So now the Gemara says, okay, what is coming to exclude? Maybe it's coming to exclude grape juice. Well, no, because the Gemara said, you should not use grape juice for nesachim for libational purposes. Heavy kosher, but if you used it, it works. So you see, grape juice, bidi eved, is usable for libational purposes, and therefore bidi eved should be usable on the mizbeach as well. V'cheivan dim heavy kosher. So the kevan dim heavy kosher, anan afil lechatchilanami, and obviously I will say if halacha l'maisa, you could use bidi eved, you could use grape juice for libational purposes, then lechatchila should be fine for kiddush. In other words, even if you subscribe to this concept that you should only use wine for kiddush that is fit for the mizbeach, they're obviously not exactly on the same level, right? So in other words, grape juice, although ideally should not use it for libational purposes, if I used it, it's fine on the mizbeach. So certainly for kiddush, then it's going to be fine. I will say, by the way, just as an aside, what's wrong with grape juice for libational purposes? If you take a look at the Rashbam, second to last line, he says, Lo yavim mishum dichsev hasech nesech, right? Hasech nesech shechar. So the Gemara says it uses the Torah uses the word shechar when it comes to libational purposes, which means that ideally we like to use a wine that has intoxicational qualities to it, right? That in other words, so wine that has alcohol. That's ideally what we want to use from the lashon of shechar on the mizbeach. So therefore, again, Ideally, don't use grape juice for libational purposes. But if you did, it works. But for kiddush, it's going to be the chatchila fine. So also the Gemara says, "Amfei lechatchila nami." Amud beis damar Rava, because Rava said, "Sochet adam eshkol shalanav." And V'amar lav kiddush hayom. Rava says explicitly, you can take a cluster of grapes, squeeze out the juice, and use that for kiddush. Now, just to be clear. Obviously, you can't do that on Shabbos, right? You are not allowed to squeeze grapes on Shabbos. You're not even allowed to take, remember again, grapes are one of the fruits where even if the liquid oozes out on its own, you're not allowed to use that liquid on Shabbos. That's schitas peros, dosh. But again, technically speaking, on Friday afternoon, if you took a cluster of grapes, you love a fresh grape juice, and you wanted to squeeze for yourself a cup of fresh grape juice for Kiddush, that is fine. So therefore, I will say, so now we're going back for a second. Remember, we have a statement. Rav says you can only make Kiddush on wine that is fit for the Mizbeach. So obviously, Rav is coming to exclude something. What is he coming to exclude? Let's go. Says the Gemara, so we'll say in general, the Rashman points out over here, if when you had a barrel of wine, you didn't really want the wine that was on the surface, nor did you want the wine that was on the shulaim, the sides or the bottoms for that matter. So the Gemara says, why is that? The Rashbam says over so the wine that was on the top often had like impurities there, and the wine on the bottom obviously is the wine that's mixed in by the dregs. So maybe Rav means that the same way you wouldn't use this type of wine for libational purposes, you also should not use it for kiddush. But the Gemara says, said that although ideally you should not use wine from the top of the barrel or the bottom of the barrel for libational purposes. If you did, it works. If you did, it works. From heavy kosher, v'ela lemiute yayin kushi, borek hilasteron shal martef shal zimukin. Okay, so let's say here we go. So maybe he's coming to exclude the following wines. Okay, let's go through the list of what the Gemara seems to feel are inferior wines. Number one, yayin kushi. Yayin kushi is black wine. Borek is white wine. Interesting, right? Hilaston. Hilaston, Rashi says, is yayin masok v'chalash ma'od. Very sweet wine with low alcohol content, right? Rashi, so he's excluding black wine. So black wine also sounds like maybe wine that turned a little bit. Right, white wine, in general in halacha, white wine was always considered to be inferior wine. Elaston could be even red, but it's very sweet, very low alcohol content. Shal martef, this is actually very interesting. Shal martef means wine that you grab out of the cellar. Now I will say this would refer to, there's always, like we saw in the Mishnah, whenever you have a wine cellar, there's always assumed spoilage in the cellar. So the challenge would be if you just grab a barrel of wine, right, without checking it, and just bring that for libational purposes, that's problematic because it may be spoiled. And shal tzimukim is raisin wine. So I will say, so maybe this is what it's coming to exclude. Really, you shouldn't use all of these things for libational purposes, and therefore also shouldn't use it for kiddush. Vatanya, but we learned, bekulan lo yavi. You're right. Ideally, you shouldn't use the black wine, the white wine, the very sweet wine, the wine cellar wine, or the raisin wine. You shouldn't use any of these for libational purposes. However, vim heavy kosher. But if you brought it, it's kosher. Kosher. So b'diavad, all of these wines are fine for libational purposes, which means, now I'll say, so just to understand what's the relationship over here, any wine that is b'diavad fine for libational purposes will what? Be l'chatchila good for kiddush. Okay, so that's the relationship over here. So we'll say, so that's, by the way, again, you see, there's actually, we'll see the halacha l'maisa with this. Oh, we'll save it for later. The Gemara says, "Ve'ela lemiute yayin koses." So maybe he's coming to exclude the following wines. Yayin koses. What's yayin koses? So I'll say, so remember again, this is wine that is beginning to sour. We saw this in yesterday's daf. The Rashbam says over here. The Rashbam says, Yayin koses, hu yayin hanim karbachanos. Remember, that was the supermarket wine. Upasul de lo havish shechar, velo reilio shechar, kevan migato de sofa mialio shechar. Okay, so again, this was inferior wine. It was beginning to sour. Mazog, which means diluted wine. Megula, which means wine that was left in an open barrel. Shal shmarim, or the wine that's strained off from the dregs. V'sherech ora, and wine that has a bad odor. Bad odor. So it's like the sanya, because I was listening to this. In this list, we learn the kulan lo yavi. In this list, you may not use these wines for libational purposes. Then heavy puzzle, and if you did use it for libational purposes, it's puzzle. So I'll say, okay, so here we go. So now it seems to we have this list, right? So wine that is souring, koses, wine that is diluted, wine that comes from a left open barrel. And I will say, by the way, the left open barrel, that's not even to do with the quality of the wine. That's mashkin magulin, right? That's the general halacha that you're not allowed to consume, so you're not allowed to bring on the mizbeach anything left open overnight. So the Gemara says, Megula, or wine from the dregs, or bad odor. So this is our list. These items cannot be brought for libational purposes, and if they were brought, the libation is invalid, and therefore by extension you cannot use it for Kiddush. To which the Gemara says, L'me'ute mai. So what is Rav coming to exclude? L'me'ute koses. Let's go through this. So I will say, so now, maybe Rav is coming to exclude something from this list. So which one is he coming to exclude that cannot be used for Kiddush? So me'ute mai, me'ute koses. If ultimately again he's coming to exclude wine that's souring, plukted Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi. So we'll say that was a machlokes in yesterday's daf. That was a machlokes yesterday's daf. Whether or not souring wine can be used. Me'ute mazug. If it's coming to exclude diluted wine, so the Gemara says, Iluye aliyah. Dam Rabbi Yosef Rabbi Chanina, modim chacham Rabbi Lazar, bekol shel bracha, shim mevarchen alav ad shitin l'socha mayim. So Rabbi say, ultimately, again, dilution is actually considered to be a benefit, right? In other words, you can't make kiddush on non-diluted wine, because otherwise there's wine concentrate, and if it's wine concentrate, then ultimately, again, it's not usable. If it's coming to exclude the use of wine that was left open in a barrel overnight, then we'll say, of course you can't use that for Kiddush. Why? Sakonehi. That's the interesting. Also, again, remember, the general concern with mashkim megulin is what? That maybe a snake came, injected its venom, and therefore, again, is not really usable. And if we're talking about wine that was mixed in with the dregs, right, if that's what we're talking about, sehechi dami, what's the case? So we'll say, so now remember again, we're coming full circle over here, right? Wine that is made by soaking it in the dregs, or liquid that comes from soil, that's our whole sugya. Is that wine? Is that not wine? So here we go, what's the case? If I introduce 3 cups of liquid and got out 4, I will say, what is that? Everyone agrees that's wine. That's wine. But if I poured in 3 cups of liquid and got back out 3 cups of liquid, then what? I'm sorry. And if I went ahead and introduced 3 cups and got out 3.5 cups, that's machlokas. That's a machlokes. In other words, is that, what's that machlokes? Is that considered to be 3 cups water, half a cup wine, in which case the resulting mixture is water? Or is that 2.5 cups water, 1 cup wine, in which case again, halacha l'maisa, that works, that is wine. Ella l'me'ute sherei. Rather, I will say, it must be that Rav is coming to exclude wine with a bad odor. With a bad odor, that the same way that you can't go ahead and use that type of wine for libational purposes, you also can't use it for Kiddush. The other possibility is the no, Rav is coming to say even wine that comes around that was left over overnight. Vafilu da'arvina b'misnenes. Now what's the chap over here? Here's what's interesting. There is a way to remedy mashkin magulin. What's the way to remedy mashkin magulin? I'll say, what's the way? You strain it, because snake venom is apparently thicker than the wine. So if you strain the wine or the liquid, it's not just wine, the liquid, the snake venom remains up. So even if you strained the wine, you still can't use it for libational purposes, and by extension for kiddush purposes. Why not? Afilu achi hakriveu na lepachasecha hayitzircha o hayisapanim. Ultimately, because this pasuk is quoted that literally, if you bring it to the official, will he want it or will you curry favor? The idea being that when you bring something to the Beis HaMikdash, it has to be of the highest quality. Strained wine, you wouldn't offer strained wine to an official, and certainly again the offering of strained wine to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not appropriate as well. The other possibility, sorry, so Gemara says, good, we'll stop over here. We'll just end on this last piece. We'll leave it over here. We'll say, Shkoyach, incredible, and we'll see that Halacha L'Maisa by Kiddush and Meretz Hashem tomorrow as well. Tremendous. Shkoyach, everyone. Ever. Good. Good. We'll do. And so we'll have somebody take over for brachas.
Yeah.
And I'll take over at Miss Shir and go through some else. Paul could do brachas. But Paul has to be ready at 6:45 with talis and tefillin. Otherwise, we'll just have